Thanks very much for this opportunity to speak about a very specific threat to payments. Obviously, the ability to pay for things has been an important part of civilization for millennia. So this is a very important topic. It's a deep and systemic threat that needs to be mitigated. So what is quantum? This is one of the first questions I get. I'm not going to give a tutorial on quantum mechanics, but I will tell you what it is fundamentally is very simple. It's a new mathematical language, right, that gives us enough power to allow us to describe things being in two states, somehow being in two states at the same time. So it's a half a page set of mathematical rules, very simple rules. What gets thick and complicated is the theories we build in that mathematical framework. And this impacts everything, right, from orders of magnitude smaller sizes than a proton, when you're talking about Planck scale physics, quantum gravity, and so on, that you need to write with quantum mechanical rules, or quantum cosmology at the complete other extreme. So what does this have to do with paying for things? Okay. Well, in between, there's the physics of bits, how we store and manipulate bits and then communicate them, and so on. So we can talk about building bits, and here we have a picture. You can see 4 little loops in this picture. Those allow you to encode a 0 and a 1. Okay, that's not revolutionary. We've done that with vacuum tubes, with switches, with transistors. But these bits allow you to encode those bits in 0 and 1 at the same time, whatever that means. So these 4 bits can explore all 2 to the power of 4 configurations, 16 configurations. If you give me 40 bits, you can store in some meaningful way 1 trillion combinations at the same time, and so on, and 1 trillion trillion if you have 80 bits, and so on. So the amount of information you would need to store in a conventional computer to simulate a general quantum state of n, hundreds, thousands of these quantum bits is astronomical. It grows exponentially. So again, what does this have to do with paying for things? But there is, for now, it just appears that there's this exponential power lurking within quantum mechanics if we can somehow harness it in ICT. So this new paradigm that we talked about, Don Tapscott talked about paradigm shifts this morning, which are not always well received, to put it mildly. It leads to many positive things. So building a quantum bit is really difficult because it's super sensitive. But you can turn those lemons into lemonade and make very, very powerful sensors, orders of magnitude more powerful than we thought was even possible using just classical physics. And people are looking into how to use this for medical imaging, oil exploration, landmine detection, and so on, wherever we need a really sensitive sensor. I'll talk about, and let me just say, and I'll talk about a couple other applications, and really we're just scratching the surface, just like we had no clue what wireless communication would be good for over a century ago when it was demonstrated, or what computing would be good for in the 40s and 50s, or what the internet would be good for, and so on. We're surely just scratching the surface in terms of what this new paradigm for technologies will bring. So another thing we know it's good for is new forms of cryptography that exploit these quantum mechanical features. And I'll give you 2 of the short-term applications. Several, these are already commercially available products. So we talked about, at this conference, we talked about all sorts of technologies which obviously need to be secure. There's all the systemic capabilities we're all excited about exploiting. That also means systemic vulnerabilities. So there's an exponential need for stronger security here. At the very basis of what most of these tools are built on, you need to be able to generate random numbers. It's a very mundane task. It's flipping a coin really, really quickly on a chip, typically. Why do you need that? Well, that's your method for thwarting attackers, because they don't know the outcome of those random bits. So it's a very fundamental, primitive tool at the basis of essentially every cryptographic algorithm we know. Okay? You can't do good crypto if you can't flip a coin, a good coin. And quantum mechanics is probably the only way to actually get fundamental randomness. And a number of companies around the world are using these in practical quantum random number generators. Some are more certifiable than others. It's an emerging industry, but as you can see, they're becoming smaller, faster, and cheaper over time. Another more powerful primitive, or more sophisticated primitive, is the ability to establish cryptographic secret keys across long distances, or distant locations, through an untrusted environment. Okay, it's easy to go back, not easy, I mean, conceptually, of course, you can always keep your information in a trusted physical location, in the hands of trustworthy people, or people you trust anyway. If they're not trustworthy, you're not getting security. So, but that doesn't scale very efficiently. Okay? It's not very practical in the modern world, especially. And even Julius Caesar and before that, they used cryptography so you could take valuable information in a secure location, hand it to an untrusted courier, and have it decrypted at the other safe location. So you can use untrusted media. So we all share the internet. We all share the airwaves. There's this immense value to be had by sharing this common infrastructure. So you need somehow to establish keys between these distant locations. And quantum mechanics gives us a way to do it, not relying on the difficulty of some mathematical problem. And I'm a mathematician, so I like that idea. But physics says, actually, you can exploit the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So you just have to trust the laws of physics to establish a secret key. So this gives us, and there's proof of concept implementations around the world at the network level. So point-to-point has been commercialized for over a decade now. Trusted networks is emerging, where just the nodes, those 4 nodes there in China or in the US or Tokyo, you just have to trust those huts. You don't have to trust the fiber in between. And eventually, you won't even have to trust the nodes. It'll just be this cloud service from a provider you don't even have to trust, and you verify their honesty at the endpoints. So quantum mechanics allows for that. So it's a wonderful new tool to add to our tool chest, which allows us to work in an untrusted medium. And there's a growing amount of lack of trust. So this is a good thing that we can actually do useful things through an untrusted medium. So it's a wonderful new primitive to add to the tool chest that quantum mechanics enables. And there's many others. These are the short-term tools we know about. Now let me talk about quantum computation. To help demystify what you're probably reading in the media, all sorts of media reports over the last few years, and unfortunately it's going to get worse. It's going to be more confusing in the next 5 years, and I'll explain why shortly. But this, Einstein said to make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. So there's 2 notions of a quantum computer, okay? If you try to make it just one, you will definitely be confused. One is scalable and fault tolerant. In other words, it corrects errors. It can deal with the fact that the apparatus we're going to build quantum computers out of will not be perfect. And it has a systematic way of dealing with those errors. And it's scalable in that I can build a bigger and bigger computer. This is the general purpose quantum computer we're talking about. We know this can solve many problems we previously thought could never be solved, or it can at the very least solve them much, much more efficiently. Whether it's designing new materials for energy capture or transport, designing new drugs, improving processes for creating fertilizers, all very important for the environment, say. Optimizing systems and processes, the design of power plants, of bridges, of buildings. We know they can help with these problems. So there's a great rush around the world to be the industry leaders in the technologies that will deliver all this value to the world. So we really, really want to build a quantum computer because it'll do wonderful things. And we also want to be the solution providers because we want to be the quantum valley of the world. There's another notion of quantum computer that is essentially skipping the fault tolerance step. It may be scalable, but it's bypassing fault tolerance, which is a really, really hard step that's taking us a lot of time. So why would you skip that step? Well, because it's hard and it takes a long time and it's expensive. So the reason we're doing fault tolerance is because we know it'll work if you correct for the errors. But there's some hope that maybe we can capture some of the power of quantum computing with noisy quantum bits. Okay, that we can't leverage into a noise-free quantum computer, but maybe it can still do something. And there's evidence that we can capture the power of quantum mechanics in such a non-fault tolerant device. The question that people are trying to answer is it actually good for anything? Now, at the very least, these quantum computers or quantum devices, whatever you want to call them, they better be better at simulating themselves than a regular computer. Because if not, they're clearly not good for anything. Right? And maybe they are. And even if that question has a positive answer, and it'd be wonderful if it did, can they solve anything useful? Right? That's the question many people are striving to answer. And there's a recent paper by colleagues at Google, a nice article overviewing what you can do with these earlier quantum technologies. Okay, and as they say, there's no proof today that it can compute fast enough to solve practical problems, but that may change. So they're hopeful that this will change and it'll be useful for some. You can be cynical and say, but it's just this tiny little niche of what quantum can do, tiny little out of all the vast possibility. But if that tiny niche contains something interesting, that is certainly a very positive thing. The point I want to make is we don't know how to use one of these devices to break cybersecurity. So don't worry about that. What you have to worry about is these quantum computers, the scalable, fault-tolerant ones. And I'll tell you a bit more about that soon. So what do these mean for cybersecurity? Well, public key crypto is decimated as we currently practice it. The currently deployed capabilities are decimated. And this isn't, buying public key crypto is not like buying curtains. It's not like there's plenty at the store. You just pick a new one and move on. We don't have anything ready to be deployed in a global scale that is as secure as these two against classical computers. Symmetric key crypto is not decimated, but it is weakened. You do have to transition to larger keys to be secure against the known attacks. Now, at my whiteboard, this is really simple. Just n goes to 2n. In practice, especially in the finance community, many of you are still using triple DES. Okay, AES has been around for ages. It's certified. It's available, and even that transition, which seems trivial in theory, is hard in practice. So even the easy part of fixing symmetric key is not so easy, and fixing public key is a major ordeal. So who cares? Who cares what these 3- and 5-letter acronyms? Well, they fundamentally underpin things like secure web browsing, auto updates. Without auto updates, we're in trouble. Because if you don't auto update, there's security flaws that hackers can exploit. And if auto updates is vulnerable, you're going to get exploited there. So we really need secure auto updates, and that hinges on public key crypto. VPN, secure email, anything depending on public key infrastructure, which of course, this includes cloud computing, payment systems, the internet, e-health, and so on, essentially everything. Okay? There's almost nothing in ICT that is not vulnerable in a very, very fundamental way, not a weekend patch job here. That's something that's hard to get across. When Heartbleed happened, it didn't take too long to fix it. This is not a patch. This is not repainting or changing the light bulbs or buying new curtains. This is rebuilding the entire foundations of your city. So do you need to worry? Because we don't have large-scale quantum computers today. So is this something you can put off till tomorrow, till you retire, till you die? Right? Well, that depends. I think some people are too late and some still have time. And you have to figure out which category you're in. So this is the only equation in my talk. Let X be the security shelf life of the information assets you have to deal with. And there can be many, so you can have many different X's. Let Y be the migration time to go from your quantum vulnerable systems to quantum resistant systems, systems designed to resist quantum attacks. And that can vary from 5 to 15 years, depending on the complexity of your world, of that specific system. And let Z be the collapse time, how long it will take for a threat actor to break those systems with a quantum computer or otherwise. Right? So for the next Y years, you are stuck with quantum vulnerable tools. And it's not just, bad things will happen in the future. Your information may be recorded right now, right? Things being transmitted through the internet or elsewhere could be recorded and archived, right? And we know that's not just hypothetical. That information today will be read, will be for sale when quantum computers are available. So for the next Y years, everything you do is vulnerable to this attack, anything depending on public key. You're supposed to be providing X years of confidentiality. Okay? Except if X plus Y is bigger than Z, you're not. You have a problem. You should be worrying yesterday. So that little patch there at the end of the X, that's after the Z years, that's when your secrets are being revealed, before their shelf life is over. So to recap, if X plus Y is bigger than Z, you're not providing those X years of security. So what does that mean? Well, that depends, right? Depends what your regulators say, depends what your customers say, right? This means Panama Papers, this means all sorts of, this means the sale of health information, and so on, of social insurance numbers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Systems don't collapse. Like the internet will keep working, except all this information that was archived is now available. Now, if Y is bigger than Z, systems collapse. This we absolutely must avoid. Because again, if systems collapse and you don't have that failover, if it's, it's one thing to say, well, we have it all ready to go on our test systems, and we just need to flip a switch, and it'll be deployed over the weekend. Then we're generally okay, usually. But if not, if this takes 6 months to 5 years to patch, you have a problem. When critical systems like payment systems start going down, you have a problem. You also have, and especially in payments, just the consumer confidence in your systems is critical. Even if they don't go down, but there's the fear that they might go down, and people start putting their money under a mattress, that's really, really bad for global business. Now, another fact is if we kind of wait till the last minute, maybe a little too late, and we rush and slap a Band-Aid on, right? If we rush Y, that's going to be expensive. Okay? If you fold it into your usual risk, cyber roadmap, and it's just part of your regular spending, you have a target date, everything's quantum ready by then, you'll have done it properly. Like it takes 10 to 14 years to properly deploy crypto, according to the Deputy Chief of CSE, what he said a few days ago. Right? So it takes time. If you compress that, you're going to make mistakes at all sorts of different levels. Coding errors, design errors, all sorts of deployment errors. And you're going to have countless more zero-day attacks, right? If you rush. Because people will often tell me, as if I don't know this, that the real problems, the real hacks today are not because of crypto being broken, but because of very mundane things, or like coding errors, buffer overflows. Well, we know that, and if you rush this, you're going to have countless more buffer overflows and design flaws, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't want to rush this. Now, none of these top three have short-term impacts. So they're not going to motivate. Kevin Lynch once told me, he wrote in this article, that people don't change their behavior because they see the light, they change their behavior because they feel the heat. And these top three, there's not a lot of heat generated, not a lot of motivation to actually do anything. Nobody's going to get fired. Your Christmas bonus isn't going to be affected by taking action or not taking action here. So that unfortunately means not a lot of action is going to happen. However, I do think, and I'm seeing this more and more, that it's starting to become a differentiator. Now, it may not matter in your business or your vendor's business, but in some it is. And in some companies, I see a very mature response to this. Nothing heroic. They're not bluffing. They just say, yeah, we get it. We're not quantum safe now, but we understand what needs to get done, and we have a plan in place. We're putting a plan in place to be ready in time, and we're studying it, and we're tracking it. And they clearly know what they're talking about. There still is the deer in headlights response, or the used car salesman response, which are going to be increasingly unacceptable. So I think it will start to become a business differentiator. And then people will start feeling the heat, and hopefully it'll drive the necessary actions, which I'll get to soon. So what is Z? When is this going to happen? Because if Z is 50 years, most people can wait. If Z is 5 years, we're way too late. So how do we estimate this? Because the correct answer is we don't know. Now that's a typical response you'll get from the academic community. And that's, because they don't want to be wrong. And they honestly don't know. But it's not like we have no clue. So I've been tracking, because I started off in cryptography and cybersecurity in the early 90s. I thought quantum computing was stupid. I rejected it. Then my supervisor forced me to read about it, and then I realized it wasn't stupid. It was a whole new paradigm that was going to disrupt what I was working on. So then I said I didn't want to spend the next 20 years of my life building something that will be dead on arrival. So I switched to understand the new paradigm. And in recent years, I've been refocusing on building new cyber tools that will resist. Now that I understand these quantum tools, want to build new systems that will resist them, resist attack from them. So how large of a quantum computer is needed? That's a really, really hard question. There's so many layers between the high-level algorithms and the actual device. And there's many steps. And any improvement in these compilation steps mean you need fewer and fewer resources. So right now, the estimate is you need between 1 million and 1 billion physical quantum bits to break RSA 2000. Okay? But 1 million and 1 billion, that's already a big range, right? That's years of work to scale from a computer that can factor with a million qubits from one with 1 billion qubits. So which one is it? So we improve algorithms, right? That's what we're doing in the research community. We compile them more and more efficiently. We have better fault-tolerant algorithms for taking noisy qubits and turning them into good qubits. Does it take 100 noisy qubits to make one good qubit, or 1,000, or 10? Right? And more smart people are entering this field. And these are things we're tracking in terms of, at the end of the day, so at my research group at the University of Waterloo and around the world, we're studying a lot of the pieces, and my company integrates, takes all this research information and compiles it into a bottom line estimate of how large of a quantum computer do we need. So there's this downward trending curve in terms of what does it need? What do we need to break cryptography as we know it? And then there's an upward curve, right, way below this curve for now. How big of a quantum computer do we have? Well, we have 0 logical qubits right now. In the media, you'll have seen 1, 10, even 17 now physical qubits. So our friends at Yale very nicely wrote an article outlining the 7 stages to building a fault-tolerant, scalable quantum computer. Several platforms, implementation platforms, have achieved the first 3 layers, and they all have very subtle, boring benchmarks that don't look good on the cover of newspapers, but they're very meaningful. The last major harbinger for the coming of a large-scale quantum computer is stage 4. And this is what several platforms, superconducting qubits, ion traps, solid-state qubits, are very close to achieving, I think. This means they've somehow collected 100 or so physical qubits and make them behave like one good quantum bit. This is the analog of a vacuum, a very big first-generation vacuum tube. Okay? And as scientists keep working on stages 1, 2, 3, they'll come up with smaller, better, cheaper vacuum tubes and maybe the equivalent of a transistor, a very different platform. But once we have that first design of a vacuum tube, we're going to go to stages 5, 6, 7, which is, well, now give me 2, and 4, and 8, right? And then 2,000 or 5,000, and break RSA. So they're very different benchmarks we have to track at all these different stages. So it's not easy. What number have you factored lately? How big of a computer do you have today? Those are the wrong benchmarks today, even though people keep asking. It's the wrong question. So what I've been tracking for 20 years now is the key benchmarks along this chain of 7 stages. And people are working on, in anticipation, they're working on stages 5, 6, 7 already. So our friends recently published something in Science looking at how you can integrate an ion trap approach, which is one of the front-running approaches, into a large-scale system. And if you look at the literature, there's a lot of non-sexy stuff that is really moving that needle. So you might not read it. I mean, some of it, it depends on the quality of the marketing department of the organization that does it. So it may or may not make the front page of your newspapers. But if you look at what really matters, this is just a pseudo-random selection. This is not an exhaustive list. You'll notice it's all really, really recent. You'll notice this is Christmas Eve these people posted. These people are crazy. What are they doing on Christmas Eve? Posting. So they're very dedicated to what they're doing. They're working really, really hard. They're going to build a quantum computer or die trying, right? They're doing amazing work looking at how to build a scalable system. And these are somewhat thankless metrics, because a bigger computer, that you can sell. A faster, those are very simple things to brag about. But we have a scalable quantum circuit. Nobody knows what that means. But it means it's one you can actually hopefully build into a large-scale system. People are looking at how to wire them, how to organize them, integrated circuits, and so on. Very important steps towards achieving stages 4, 5, 6, 7. So our friends at Yale, Delft, at the right, my colleague at Waterloo, bonding technology, right? How do you build bigger and bigger? How do you stick these things together, basically, and they still work? Our friends in China wasn't really on the map in this particular subfield of quantum information until last July. They were doing amazing stuff in quantum communication, global, quantum satellite communication, and so on, but not really quantum computing. And my attitude has always been, maybe not yet, but they have thousands of really bright quantum scientists. They have laboratories. They have the intellectual capacity to very quickly pivot. And superconducting qubits in particular, 10 years ago, it was really, really hard to start a quantum computing group in superconducting qubits. There's a very small handful of people who could possibly build the equipment, and it would take them a long time. Now, not that it's easy today, but it's a heck of a lot easier, and you can get into the game a lot faster. And last August, they did a not very well-known result on 1 qubit, and then March 30th, 10 qubits. Okay, if they continue that scaling law, we're in trouble. I'm not sure they will, but definitely. So there's a group in China that's now in the game. And IBM, shortly after that paper from our friends in China, posted their 16 and 17 qubit computers. Now, these are physical layer qubits. Again, it'll probably take over 100 of these to give you a fault-tolerant, effectively noiseless quantum bit. And this is what they're building the subparts of such a system. And largely, once you have it's a repeatable pattern. So once you get the piece working, it's a matter of gluing them together. So when will stage 4 happen? It could be 2 to 4 years. I think more likely than not by the end of 2021. And then once they have that scalable thing, how long will it take to scale to be a threat? These are the things we have to keep track of. That's the upward moving curve. And how much will my theory friends improve the theory, right? And then when will these curves overlap and break the foundations of cybersecurity? So 21 years ago, I said, you don't have to worry for 20 years, okay? We're still trying to figure out what platform to use. We have ideas. We don't have the tools to do very much of what we need to do. So the 20-year probability was 0. And then it went up to 5, and then 15 and 50%. And now, about 2 years ago, I estimated the 15-year probability, even money was 15 years. And it's already significant within a decade. This was about 2 years ago, and I keep updating these numbers all the time, and it's about, for me, the 1 decade mark is about a 1 in 6 chance now. So since April 2015, when I first publicly made these estimates, a lot of positive, things went a little more positively than I anticipated. The US government started a whole new program to deliver stage 4, essentially, by January 2021. There's a number of important scientific breakthroughs as well since then. And our friends at Microsoft also made vaguer but consistent predictions. So 10 to 15 years sounds like a long time. Sounds like, well, we can focus on this urgent stuff for now and wait for this to solve this later. But that's not a good idea, because we're dodging bullets today, right, with ransomware and everything else that's attacking us. We can't not dodge those bullets. But if we don't plan for this, we're going to get hit by a bomb. Like, it takes 10 to 15 years to properly defend against this devastating systemic threat. And if you rush it, so if you don't, then we're decimated. If you rush it, we're going to have countless more zero-day attacks. Now, there are solutions, in theory, but there's a long road to taking them to practice in a robust way. So again, this is not buying curtains or picking a new coat of paint. So the first thing is, why rely on factoring or discrete logs? Maybe there's another math problem. Much, much easier said than done, but we do think we can do it. Really, really hard. Smartest mathematicians in the world are working on this. The beauty of this solution is, superficially, it looks like the current solutions, just different math, and nobody looks at the math anyway. It's all under the hood. So at a high level, it's kind of the same, except the performance changes. Keys might be bigger or shorter, could be faster or slower. Right? So this is a sort of a plug-in replacement to some extent for what we have, sort of reestablishing the status quo, And quantum cryptography, which I told you, gives us a new tool that makes the foundations of our crypto infrastructure stronger than we ever even thought was imaginable. So there is a silver lining here. Okay, so we can, we believe, reestablish the status quo with over a decade of really hard, concerted effort. Again, it's not just a passive shopping decision you can do later. You have to start this now. But we can even, if we include this tool in strategic places, the foundations will be even more robust. And these things, you know, if you talk to the scientists in these two areas, they tend to argue with each other, like whose solution is more crap. And I beg them to not have that conversation with the non-technical audience, because they're both excellent. They both have their strengths, they have weaknesses, and together they build a stronger system than they do separately. Well, especially in the banking community, when I talk about this, I often will get the response that, yes, but we're risk averse. We don't want to try new stuff. So on the one hand, this seems paradoxical, because if you're risk averse, why are you ignoring the systemic threat? That doesn't sound like you're risk averse to me. What they mean is, we don't like to try new things, because how do we know it's going to work? Like, nobody gets fired for buying IBM, that sort of mentality. And I respect that. So we're not saying stop doing the stuff that is trusted, certifiable today. Of course, keep your PCI compliance, for example. We're saying do both for now. For the next 2 decades or so, you need both, right? Keep using the current stuff you trust, add an extra layer in. And there's different ways to add in the 2 layers. You can literally encrypt twice or do 2 key establishments and combine them separately. That way, that's the easiest way to keep your PCI, your FIP certification, and so on. Eventually, we'll find more subtle ways, cleverer ways to combine them in a way that's certified. But this is the risk-averse thing to do, is to keep the stuff you have and add additional quantum-resistant crypto in a sensible way. So you're also mitigating this known systemic threat. So what do you do today? Well, you probably don't know what to do today. Some more organizations do have a plan, but that's step 1, is don't panic, don't go buy stuff and just jam it in. Figure out, do a risk assessment, what we call a quantum risk assessment. And we've laid out our methodology, so feel free to download it and use it, and give it to your risk managers and ask them to do it. We've organized it so it aligns well with the NIST cybersecurity framework. But these are very simple, obvious pieces. You can align it with any sensible cyber risk management framework. Right? Very obvious steps like, where is your data? And of course, that exercise alone is good cyber hygiene. Which crypto protects all these various bits of data? Very simple, systemic stuff that most organizations don't have ready to look at. And then eventually, when we do risk assessments, we'll find 10 threats. And the bottom 7 are not really worth worrying about. Nobody's going to archive your data for 15 years, use a multi-million-dollar quantum computer. It's billions to build, but I'm estimating millions to use the first generation to steal $100, right? So you focus on the top threats, and you can really focus your mind and your effort on where your X plus Y is greater than Z. And things you can do now, right? Again, I'm not saying rip out what you have, do anything heroic, disruptive, is you can also start testing the solutions on your systems and make sure that these solutions that are emerging will actually work for you. And to help with that, we've started an open source platform for quantum resistant cryptography. So you don't have to, like, what tool, there's a handful of commercial tools available. Which one do you trust? Are these companies even going to be here in a few years? So we started an open source platform where we take all the best implementations around the world and make them available in a MIT license way. So what's the real bottleneck here? There are tremendous technical challenges to fixing this. And we have to motivate people, smartest mathematicians and computer scientists and engineers to solve them. Up until recently, there wasn't much motivation to do this, and there still isn't enough. Why would a mathematician, with all this potential, spend their time trying to break a system and probably fail? So then they don't get their PhD, or maybe they do, but they won't get a job in academia. So it's not a very tantalizing prospect for them. So the real problem is actually not technical or academic. After the WannaCry attacks, there's this nice article in the New York Times where the author writes, if I've painted a bleak picture, it is because things are bleak. Our software evolves by layering new systems on old, and that means we have constructed entire cities upon crumbling swamps. And we live on the fault lines where more earthquakes are inevitable. All the key actors have to work together and fast. And obviously the academics and the researchers, they're important actors, but they're not the only ones, right? Ultimately, you have to decide to be secure. I talk to technical people in organizations, and they say, yeah, we get what you're saying, but I don't know how to convince my CEO that this is a smart business decision, right? Or, cybersecurity, proposals for leadership in cybersecurity will make it to political leadership, to their desks. And it'll what people feel is when it reaches that point, it gets dismissed because this is not kitchen table conversation. It's not a politically smart move to champion protecting against tomorrow's threats. Protecting against today's threats, you're a hero. But protecting against tomorrow's threats, it's not going to help me get reelected. So it's very worrisome. There's other choices people advocate, which really, really worry me. We'll do nothing. My vendors, I get my crypto from my vendors. They're going to solve this for me. Well, have you asked them? Because I talk to vendors all the time, and they say, well, my customers aren't asking for this. Therefore, it's not on my roadmap. And then I talk to customers who assume their vendors are going to take care of it. So you have to have this conversation, because they're in the business of making money. You have to let them know this is what you want in 5 or 10 years. And then they can put on their roadmaps and deliver it. Or another one that really worries me is do nothing until NIST has finished standardizing some crypto, quantum-safe crypto, in the early 2020s. I agree you shouldn't panic and just quickly implement your own attempt at crypto. I mean, that's very few people know how to do that properly. But doing nothing is a bad idea. You have to prepare to hit the ground running when the NIST standards are ready. There's a lot of work to be done. Just because somebody hands you a crypto, we have AES, right? If you haven't already deployed it, if it hasn't been on your roadmap for the last 5 years, you're not going to deploy AES quickly, or not everybody can. I'm sure some people have that agility, but most don't. Or what do I do to get it over with? Which vendor can I use I just want to deploy quantum-safe crypto now and get it over with. Well, cybersecurity is not something you get over with. It's not something, you can't outsource responsibility, right? You have to have this has to be just part of your cyber hygiene, part of your discipline for your organization to be secure. So you can certainly put a Band-Aid on today, but you have to constantly reassess this over the next decade and more. There are glimmers of hope, okay? It's not, because for years I've been, people ask me, what do you need from us? And they expect me to say money, which is true, I do need money. But more importantly, I need you to make a statement that you want our government systems, these systems, those systems, to be quantum resistant by some deadline. Because that will create a pull for everything that needs to get done. And the NSA in the United States created such a pull by making it clear that they want theirs, there's a suite of protocols called Suite B, which you need to use if you want to do business with the US government. And they said these will need to be quantum resistant in the near future. And that triggered NIST to start a process to standardize some primitives by the early 2020s. So the deadline for submissions is later this year, and that'll be evaluated, and they aim to have a handful of standards. This is not the final story, just to be clear. But at least there'll be some set you could focus on. Because I get people constantly asking me, which of these dozens upon dozens of proposals I see in the literature should I use? Of course, we don't know. I mean, I could give you my favorites, but it's going to keep moving. It'll be nice when in the early 2020s there's a few things to focus on. That doesn't mean you can't do all the other work in parallel. Doesn't mean you can't use one of these as long as you're ready to switch it out for something better. Just don't hardwire it in and be stuck with it. Canadian leadership has made similar statements. We haven't had similar policy. It's not been as clear and as explicit as the US, but they're certainly sending a strong message at the top of CSE, for example. but we really need policies that say these government systems, these critical infrastructures must have a plan. That hasn't happened yet, but it needs to happen. So as I wrap up, I just want to step back and highlight that this is actually a historic opportunity. Our ICT infrastructure, most of the fundamental pieces of it, were never designed to be the foundations of every aspect of our lives, okay? You can ask Don Tapscott, who talked about ARPANET and so on this morning. This was not meant to be the foundation of everything. So now we have our entire ICT infrastructure built on, the previous author used the swamp metaphor. I think it's on this very flammable bale of hay, right? That the big bad wolf can just blow away with one breath. And we're kind of stuck with it, because until it's broke, it's really hard to motivate people to fix it. Until there's a cyber Pearl Harbor, it's really hard to have any massive overhaul. Now, quantum, gives us that threat, gives us the big bad wolf, but not in real time. Because if it came in real time, we'd be toast. But it said, no, in some time in the future, you have a few decades, and this is 1994 when you first learned of this, so it gives us time to very systematically rebuild the foundations of our cybersecurity infrastructure, which we desperately need. If you talk to people down in the trenches of cybersecurity, they're very worried. Like, this is a very fragile system where we built everything. It's a miracle it works. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but it's a patchwork. And here's the motivation now to fix it. And it will not only make us more protected against quantum threats, but any other crypto threats. It'll force us to start practicing better cyber hygiene. It'll give us a stronger cyber immune system, which we desperately need, and it gives us a strong reason for doing it. As we move forward, we talked about blockchain this morning. It's vulnerable to quantum attack, right? So we need to make sure that we have quantum-resistant versions of blockchain deployed in the future. So we don't have to not only protect what we have today, but what we're deploying over the next 5 to 10 years. You don't want it to be dead on arrival. AI, we're going to have another talk later this afternoon on artificial intelligence, which is going to be running more and more of our lives in a not terribly transparent way. What if it gets hacked? Just think of it, everything AI is going to be controlling and managing over the next few years. Is it secure? How often do you see security as one of the boxes, one of the priorities? Security is this very unappreciated horizontal, right? It's generally like this. I was talking to somebody at lunch today, and he's constantly raising the security flag in his team, and they find him annoying, right? You're not the fun guy in the room or the fun person in the room if you're the one saying, but can we make this secure and protect people's privacy and so on? It's not the coolest, most money-making position. But we have a historic opportunity to make things better, and we really need to seize it. And furthermore, Canada's uniquely positioned, okay? So again, there's a global race to seize the quantum opportunity, and Canada's positioned very well here. And it's possible with proper planning and foresight to also live in a safer cyber-enhanced world, but it does require deliberate decisions from the top and a lot of work down at the bottom and everything in between. And Canada, I've been coordinating a national effort across all the sectors. We call it Quantum Safe Canada, because we really think we can protect Canada and Canadians, including our payment systems, from this quantum threat. And we can also inevitably be the go-to place. There's Bob Gordon in the audience. He brought this concept to me. We can be the go-to place for cybersecurity solutions. So when other jurisdictions who've ignored this threat, as humans do, realize, oh crap, what do we do to solve this? You come to Canada and we'll help you solve it. So it's a great economic opportunity for Canada and Canadians as well. So I want to thank you for your attention. I welcome questions. There is one item of homework. So there's a lot you can do. But the passing grade, you can go for A+ if you want, but the passing grade is please ask people in your organizations, your vendors, whoever's relevant. Don't ask people who have nothing to do with cybersecurity, but ask relevant people, what's your plan for dealing with the quantum threat? And if they actually give you an answer, send it to me and I'll let you know what to ask them next. Okay? That's the passing grade. And then you can earn bonus marks as well. So thanks so much for your attention. Happy to take some questions. Yes, microphone 1, I guess.
Thanks. That was great. Martin Kyle from Central One. So the assumption of the quantum threat is, at least in the current mode, is that data is being retained and will be accessible when the quantum threat materializes.
That's one risk scenario, yes.
Do you have any recommendations on data retention that align with regulatory requirements?
In how to currently retain the data to be quantum resistant?
Right.
So beyond, when you do a risk assessment, you look at everything, the data in transit, how it's stored, how it's accessed, how it's backed up. It's complicated. There's many different unexpected potential threats. There's certainly things you can do now. If you are in this X plus Y greater than Z scenario, there are solutions you can deploy today to give you the best available protection, and you do it in a way where you can easily upgrade it over time to better and better solutions.
Another question, thank you. Another question is, why would not quantum controls protect against quantum threats? And I know you spoke about having quantum cryptography. That's an example of a quantum control, I presume. Will it not simply become an arms race once the quantum computing materializes at stage 4, such that the quantum threats are countered by quantum controls? So
I have a very, holistic, ecumenical approach to the mitigation part. You need to mitigate the threat. Okay, you start with that and you figure out what needs to be protected, and then you look for the detailed solutions next. And that landscape changes. When we advise people, we're very critical and honest about whether quantum crypto is even possible, because you need a quantum channel. So maybe you could get your own, if there isn't fiber already available, if the system isn't already deployed, it'll become more expensive. If you're in China along Shanghai, Hefei, or Beijing, that service is already available or will be available already. So you just have to pay for the service. So there's different costs and availabilities for quantum crypto. And sometimes it's not even an option yet. Other times it is, but it comes with certain cost and performance costs. And you have to figure out whether it's worth, it's a calculation. So and plus quantum cryptography doesn't do everything. It gives you random bits and it allows you to establish keys. You still need an authentic channel. And there really isn't practical quantum authentication. So you'll still need a classical authentication method, which is fine. That only needs to be secure real time. So it's a hybrid of the two. And indeed, if you use quantum, you're protected against the cryptanalytic threat. You still have to protect against side channel attacks, implementation errors, insider threat, and so on and so on. That's why really the most paranoid thing is to do quantum crypto, best available quantum resistant crypto, and the best available current crypto, and combine them all. But this really comes out of a proper assessment. Yes, microphone 2, please.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I was wondering, you talked about systems and processes and how they can be adapted. Sorry, am I not clear?
I couldn't parse what you said.
Yeah, you talked about systems and processes which we have in place and
Yeah.
how we can adapt them to address this threat. What do you think about cryptocurrency, and how do you see that story panning out with this threat in mind?
So we're actively studying that now. So right now, it's vulnerable. Parts of it are more vulnerable than others. So there's the hash, if you want me to get technical for a second, the hash function part is weakened, but not broken necessarily. But the public key part is decimated. So, we can't make Bitcoins a lot faster with a quantum computer. Plus it's expensive to run a quantum computer initially. But you can steal, the wallets are protected with public key crypto, for example. So you can steal money with a quantum computer. Right? And you have to start looking at all the different scenarios and the other applications of blockchain and say, what does quantum mean to this? And how do we migrate the system to one that is resistant to quantum attacks in time. So you have to do the X, Y, Z analysis for all the many applications of blockchain. So it's ready, you know, as it gets deployed in the next 5 to 10 years. It is, even if it's not quantum safe immediately, there's a plan to make it quantum safe in time.
I've just got a question really that kind of relates to, do I have to worry about this before I retire? And that is your assessment of X.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure I understood your data. So you've been looking at X and you've been tracking it was 20 years out.
Well, I think you mean Z, right?
Sorry, Z.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Z. So you've been tracking that as it goes forward. Are you seeing that it's increasing exponentially, or are you seeing that it's increasing linearly? And if exponentially, have you overlaid that to see what the shortest time frame would be?
So you don't mean Z, you mean like the number of quantum, like the metrics towards achieving Z?
The metrics that give you the number of years before you think this is going to happen.
Yeah, many of them have been increasing exponentially. Like the rate, so you have to have certain signal to noise ratios above a certain, or below a certain threshold, and so on and so on. And my colleagues have written papers that say they approach those exponentially. Now, once you've surpassed them, you've surpassed them. I mean, it helps to surpass them by more, but they're, you know, and they move on to the other challenge. So most of the metrics that have been tracked, the progress towards crossing that line has been exponential. And then they're on to the next engineering or physics challenge. So it hasn't been like, oh, people dragging their feet and they went from 1 to 2 to 3. If you look at the real metrics, progress has been very aggressive. And it doesn't need to be exponential. Even linear is fine. But in practice, most of the ones I've looked at have been exponential. Well, thanks so much for your attention. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you'd like to continue the discussion. And again, if you get an answer back, this has worked. Okay, I've talked to vendors who said, yeah, these people in the banks, they asked me what we're doing with the quantum threat, and it turns out it was somebody I told, like, please ask your vendors, because if you don't ask them, they're not going to be motivated to act on this. So thanks so much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing from you.